Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into some really fascinating stuff. A brand new report from the American Historical Association.
The AHA, right.
Yep, exactly. They've been around since like 1884, I think. They're basically the voice when it comes to history education here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And you know how much debate there's been lately about what should and shouldn't be taught in U.S. history, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere you turn, it feels like.
Right. So the AJ decided, you know what, let's cut through all the noise and actually see what's really happening in classrooms.
I like that, getting down to the nitty-gritty evidence base.
Yeah, exactly. Evidence over opinions, right?
Good for the...
So this report, it's like a backstage pass to what's actually going on in U.S. history education. How teachers are moving away from those massive textbooks.
Oh, tell me about it. I still remember those days.
Right. To the pressures teachers are facing in this whole politically charged world we're living in. It's pretty wild.
It is. It really is. And this report, I have to say, is like a treasure trove of information. I study how teaching materials are made and used in the classroom, and this kind of deep dive into U.S. history is incredibly valuable.
Totally. And one of the things that really surprised me was this whole shift away from those traditional textbooks, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, those things were dinosaurs, honestly.
Seriously, you practically needed a forklift to carry those things around.
Right. This report found that digital platforms, they're becoming the new norm. Things like free and open educational resources, that anyone can use, and even stuff that teachers are creating themselves, which is so cool.
It's amazing, right? And it makes sense. Things change so fast these days, those old textbooks couldn't keep up.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand modern technology by reading a manual from the 1980s.
Seriously. So the report, it actually mentions a bunch of specific tools that teachers are using now, and some of them sound amazing.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there are some paid platforms like Newsela. You heard of that one?
That name rings a bell, but I can't quite place it. Refresh my memory.
Yeah, so Newsela uses like news articles to teach literacy and social studies. Super relevant to what's going on in the world right now.
Oh, right. I've heard good things about it.
Yeah.
Engaging for the students, right?
Exactly. And then there's Discovery Education's Tech Book. It's basically like a digital textbook, but way more interactive, I'm assuming.
Makes sense. Everything's going digital.
And then on the free side of things, there's always good old Khan Academy. They cover, like, everything.
Khan Academy, yeah, they're great. A lot of teachers use their resources.
For sure. Oh, and there are also materials from the Gilder Lehrman Institute. We'll link to all of this stuff in the show notes so you can check it out.
Perfect. I'm sure some people are scrambling for their notepads right now, always looking for good resources.
Always. But, okay, here's where it gets kind of interesting. The report found that teachers had, well, mixed feelings about teachers. Paid teachers. TPT.
Ah, TPT. Yeah, I can see how that would be a mixed bag.
Right. Some teachers love it, some not so much. So what's the deal with that? Why all the mixed reactions?
Well, I think TPT really embodies this larger trend of teachers, wanting more say in what resources they use in their classroom. They're looking for things that fit their teaching style, their students' needs. And TPT gives them some of that flexibility.
I can see that. But there's got to be a downside, right?
Yeah, there are definitely some things to consider. The report actually points out a few downsides, like the quality of materials can be all over the place, which can make it tough to find what you're looking for.
Oh, yeah, I bet. It's like, how do you know it's actually good quality?
Right, and does it actually line up with what you need to be teaching, meeting those curriculum goals?
So it's a trade-off, right? Teachers have the freedom to find resources they really connect with. But they also have to be super careful about what they choose.
It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure. But listen, we can't talk about U.S. history education without addressing the elephant in the room.
You mean politics?
Bingo!
Yeah, I figured. There's so much talk about, like, political agendas seeping into the classroom, but, like, what did the AHA actually find? Are teachers out here trying to indoctrinate students, or is that a bunch of hype?
Well, the report actually found that, get this, while teachers aren't necessarily trying to push their own political beliefs, they are feeling the pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. It's a tough spot to be in.
Oh, I bet. So how does that play out in the classroom? Does it actually impact what gets taught and how?
Absolutely. The report gives some really interesting examples of both, conservative and progressive influences. On the one hand, you've got conservative groups who are really pushing for what they call, quote, patriotic education.
Patriotic education. Huh. What does that even mean in, like, practical terms?
Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded term, right? But it often means focusing on a more, shall we say, celebratory view of American history, less emphasis on the less flattering aspects of our past.
Okay, I get it. So kind of glossing over the rough
So it's a
parts.
nutshell, yeah. Then on the other side, you have, progressive movements who are advocating for, quote, anti-racist education. And this is about making sure that the experiences of marginalized groups, those that are often left out of those traditional narratives, are brought to the forefront.
Yeah, that definitely seems like a more like nuanced approach to history.
It aims to be, for sure.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there are multiple perspectives and experiences that shape our understanding of the past. It's not just one single story.
Right. And it's about making sure those stories are heard. Okay, so on one hand, we've got this push for a more, I don't know, maybe idealized version of history. And then on the other, there's this push for a more inclusive, complete view of history.
Mm.
And teachers are stuck in the middle of all of it.
Exactly. Trying to teach history honestly and responsibly, but also being aware of the concerns of their communities, their school boards, even parents.
It's like walking a tightrope, it sounds like.
That's a good way to put it.
But I'm really curious, like, how does this actually translate to what's happening in the classroom, lesson by lesson?
Yeah.
Are there any specific topics or events where we really see these tensions playing out?
Totally. The report actually really dives deep into how some specific topics are being taught, and it's fascinating.
Right. It's like, how are teachers actually navigating all of this?
Exactly. So maybe we could each pick a topic that, stood out to us and kind of unpack it a bit.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Okay, so one that really jumped out at me was how they're teaching Native American history these days.
Good one. That's a tricky one for sure. And the report, it highlights both, the progress that's been made, but also the challenges that still exist. Like one thing it pointed out was that coverage of Native American history, it often kind of drops off after the 19th century.
Yeah, it's like after the 1800s, Native Americans just disappear from the narrative.
It's so strange, right? Like they just poof, vanished. And that just reinforces this whole like inaccurate and kind of harmful idea that Native Americans are stuck in the past.
It's like they cease to exist as modern people, which obviously isn't true at all.
Right. And it kind of ignores like over a century of history and experience.
And speaking of ignoring history, this was wild. The report actually found that almost 25% of teachers said that the period before colonization, so before Europeans arrived, was the hardest to teach.
Wow, really? That's really surprising.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. I mean, how much emphasis is placed on that period in like textbooks and teacher training?
Not a lot, to be honest. It's often just a quick overview before diving into European arrival and colonization.
Exactly. So it's no wonder that so many teachers struggle with it.
And it's a shame because there's so much rich history and culture there that's just completely overlooked.
Totally. And the report actually encourages teachers to like really challenge those simplistic narratives, the whole conflict and conquest thing.
Yeah, to move beyond that, to provide a more nuanced understanding of indigenous history and cultures.
It's about time, right? Okay, my turn. So another topic that I found super interesting was how they're teaching the founding era these days.
Oh, interesting. Because you would think that would be like a pretty straightforward period to teach, right?
Right. I mean, it's like the foundation of the United States, the
Yeah.
Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all that good stuff. But the report actually found that it's often taught in a very, I don't know, dry and kind of superficial way.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's like, memorize these dates, know who these guys were, and that's it.
Wow, that's kind of a missed opportunity, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, this is a period that's full of like debate and nuance, competing visions for what America should be.
Yeah.
But the report found that a lot of that just gets lost in translation.
And it kind of loses its like dramatic flair?
Exactly. It's like, where's the drama? Where's the conflict? The intrigue?
Right. And it's not like it's not there.
Not at all. And it's not just about making it more entertaining, although I think that's important too, but it's about helping students understand that the founding of the United States, it wasn't this like inevitable march to freedom and democracy. It was a messy, complex, often contradictory process.
It was a process full of compromises.
Exactly. With winners and losers.
And, people back then, they didn't have all the answers, right? They were figuring things out as they went along, making mistakes, changing their minds, just like we do today.
That's such a good point. And I think sometimes we forget that, We put the founding fathers on this pedestal, and we forget that they were just like people.
Mm-hmm.
Flawed, complicated people trying to build a new nation from scratch.
Totally. They weren't saying.
Right. Which makes them even more interesting, I think. And the report actually found that some teachers are trying to get at that complexity by like using role playing and simulations.
Oh, that's cool. I love that.
Right. So instead of just reading about like the Constitutional Convention, students actually get to, like, step into the shoes of the delegates and debate and compromise and try to hammer out this new government.
That's brilliant. Talk about bringing history to life.
Right. And the report highlights how effective these kinds of active learning techniques can be in helping students really understand and connect with the material.
Totally. It's one thing to read about history, but it's another thing entirely to experience it, even if it's just a simulation. It's so much more engaging.
And memorable. I bet those students remember those lessons way more than just like reading about it in a textbook.
Absolutely. So it sounds like there's some really innovative stuff happening in the classroom.
For sure. And it's not just limited to Native American history and the founding era. Like there was another section in the report about how teachers are tackling westward expansion.
Oh, interesting. Because that's another one of those topics that can be really like romanticized, you know?
Oh, totally. It's like cowboys and pioneers and the Wild West. But of course, there's a much more complex and often brutal reality behind that myth.
Absolutely. So, how are teachers dealing with that? Are they trying to debunk the myths?
That's exactly what they're doing. They're focusing on presenting a more nuanced perspective, highlighting the diversity of experiences and perspectives that shape that period.
I like that. So, it's about moving beyond that single narrative.
Exactly. So instead of just focusing on like the Oregon Trail and the gold rush, they're also talking about the impact on Native American communities,
Mm.
the displacement and violence they faced. They're talking about the experiences of immigrants who were drawn to the West but often faced discrimination and hardship. And they're talking about the roles of women and families who were essential to the settlement and development of the West.
It's about recognizing that westward expansion wasn't just this like glorious adventure for everyone involved. There were a lot of different stories being told.
Exactly. And I think that's so important for students to understand because those stories, they still resonate today. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They shape our understanding of the West and of America as a whole.
Okay, so we've talked about Native American history, the founding era, and westward expansion. But we can't talk about U.S. history without talking about slavery, right? I mean, it's such a painful and, unfortunately, a central part of our nation's story. And it's something that continues to have such a profound impact on our society today. Did the report address how teachers are approaching this topic, especially in today's climate? It seems like every other day there's a new debate about how it should be taught.
You're right. It's a conversation that never really goes away, does it? And for good reason. It's such a fundamental part of understanding who we are as a nation and how we got here.
Exactly. So how are teachers navigating this? It seems like a minefield to even approach the subject.
You're not wrong. But the report makes it clear that teachers aren't shying away from this topic. They understand how crucial it is for students to understand the full scope of slavery, its causes, its consequences, and its lasting legacy.
Which is a heavy load to unpack, to say the least.
It is. And the report talks about how teachers are approaching this topic with incredible care and nuance. It's not about avoiding the difficult parts, but about presenting them in a way that's accurate, sensitive, and age appropriate.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a delicate balance to strike.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how teachers are incorporating primary sources into their lessons.
Oh, that's so powerful. I remember when I was in school, getting to read like actual letters and diaries from that time period. It just brought history to life in a whole new way.
Exactly. And it's even more impactful when those voices belong to those who were enslaved. Hearing their stories in their own words, it just adds a whole other level of understanding and empathy.
Oh, absolutely. It personalizes it in a way that a textbook just never could.
Exactly. And it allows students to connect with the human cost of slavery on a deeper level, which is crucial for understanding the lasting impact it's had on our society.
Okay, so we've talked about how teachers are approaching some of the like really big, challenging topics in U.S. history. But what about those other periods that, to be honest, a lot of people find kind of
Kind of boring.
yeah, I was going to say difficult to get excited about. Like, I remember in school, the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, those always felt kind of like a slog to get through.
Oh, totally. I can see how those wouldn't necessarily be the most thrilling periods to teach or to learn about for that matter. But the report, did it address those eras at all?
They did, and they actually found that a lot of teachers, they struggle with how to make those periods feel, relevant and engaging for students.
Really? Why is that, do you think?
Well, it seems like it's partly because students have a hard time connecting those eras to their own lives. Like, they seem so far removed from the world we live in today.
Right, like it's hard to relate to like robber barons and monopolies.
Exactly. So the challenge for teachers is, how do you make those topics come alive for students who are, like, glued to their phones and worried about TikTok followers?
Right, like how do you bridge that gap?
Well, one way, according to the report, is to focus on the human stories behind the big events. So instead of just talking about, like, industrialization and urbanization in the abstract,
Which can feel very dry and like textbooky.
totally. Instead of doing that, teachers are bringing those topics to life by exploring, like, the experiences of immigrants who came to America looking for a better life.
Oh, wow. That's so much more relatable.
Right. And talking about the workers who toiled in those factories and mines.
Yeah.
The ones who built the modern industrial economy. And then you've got the reformers who were fighting for social justice, for better working conditions, for women's suffrage.
Right. So it's about showing how those big abstract historical forces actually played out in the lives of real people.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes history so fascinating, right? It's not just a bunch of dates and names in a textbook. It's about the stories of people who came before us, their struggles, their triumphs, their dreams.
And those stories, they can teach us so much about ourselves, about our world today. They can help us understand the challenges we face and inspire us to create a better future.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more period, the Civil Rights Movement. It's such a pivotal moment in U.S. history, and it continues to be so relevant to the conversations we're having today about racial justice and equality. What do the reports say about how that's being taught?
Yeah, that's a huge one. And it seems like there are always new debates about how to teach it, especially now.
For sure. So what's the approach?
Well, one of the things the report emphasized was the power of bringing in firsthand accounts and perspectives.
Oh, wow, like actual voices from the movement.
Exactly. And it makes sense, right? Because many of the people who participated in the movement, who marched for freedom and equality, who risked their lives to challenge injustice, they're still alive today.
That's incredible. It must be so powerful for students to hear those stories directly from the people who live them.
Absolutely. It makes history come alive in a whole new way, and it really highlights the ongoing legacy of the civil rights movement. It's not just something that happened in the past, it's something that continues to shape the present.
It connects the dots between history and the world we're living in right now.
Exactly. And it shows that the fight for justice and equality, it's an ongoing process.
And it's something that we all have a role to play in.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to learn from the past, to fight for a more just and equitable future.
Well said. It's amazing how much goes into telling U.S. history. It's way more than just memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding these really complex and, frankly, challenging stories that still shape who we are today.
It really is. This report, it really highlights just how much teachers are doing day in and day out.
Right. They're not just, like, spitting out facts. They're shaping how young people see the world.
Exactly. They're helping them develop those critical thinking skills, teaching them how to, like, really engage with the past in a meaningful way.
It's like they're opening these windows to different worlds and different ways of seeing things.
I love that image. It's so true. And it's not just about the past, is it? It's about understanding the present and shaping the future.
Totally. And that brings me to you, dear listener. Thinking back on your own education, what surprised you the most about how U.S. history is being taught these days?
Yeah, what surprised you? What was different from when you were in school?
Were you surprised by, like, how much things have changed since we were stuck with those giant textbooks?
Or like how teachers are like really incorporating different voices and perspectives into their lessons. Things are so different now.
It's so important, right, to hear from a variety of voices, to get a more complete picture of what happened.
Absolutely. And that's what makes history so fascinating, right? There's always more to learn, more to uncover, more to understand.
It's an ongoing conversation, for sure. So tell us, what are your thoughts? What are you curious about? What do you wish you'd learned more about in school? Were there any topics or time periods that you felt were, I don't know, maybe glossed over?
Like, did you learn about the Harlem Renaissance?
Hmm?
Or maybe the Chicano movement? There's so much history out there. And often what we get in school is just a small sliver of it.
So what are you curious about? What are you going to go out and explore on your own? Because that's what this is all about, right? It's about sparking that curiosity, that desire to learn more, to dig deeper, to challenge what we think we know. Because history, it's not just something that happened a long time ago. It's alive. It's all around us. It's the foundation for everything we see and experience today.
Beautifully said. And if you want to learn more about what we talked about today, about this incredible report from the AHA, make sure you check out the show notes. We'll link to it there.
It's definitely worth a read. It's packed with tons of fascinating stuff that we didn't even have time to get into today.
It really is. I mean, this conversation could go on for hours, really.
Right. But we'll save that for another deep dive another day. For now, we want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And a huge thank you to our expert for lending their incredible expertise to this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Always happy to talk about history.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going, because that's how we learn, how we grow, and how we create a better future together.